Hello, good morning, everybody. Morning once again. My name is Wayne, and I'm happy to introduce to you lesson 3 of our course, Introduction to Terrorism and Threat Assessment. Now, under lesson 3, we shall be talking about physique of terrorists, religion, and terrorism. This is our points of discussion today. I want to say that last weekend I had to repeat the introduction part of this training, and also characteristics to terrorism, which was also the second lesson, because I realized when we did them the other previous 2 weekends, it was not very clear. We had challenges with the internet, with Wi-Fi. So I decided it would be better for me just to record introduction part of it again, and then characteristics of terrorism again. Otherwise, I am well. I also hope you are well. I hope you are keeping safe. I hope your families are also okay. I hope also at your workplace you are doing your best and your work is going well. I hope that everybody is in good shape. So I would like us to continue with today's lesson. We shall be talking about religion mostly. And before we can proceed, I would like to mention that in January 2017, in France, at the Louvre Museum, the city's most important cultural location, a terrorist attacked a police officer. The terrorist shouted out what has become an all too familiar cry, Allah Akbar, and once again set off an academic discussion regarding the relationship between religion and terrorism. Allah Akbar, and this cry set off a discussion in the academic field regarding the relationship between religion and terrorism. Um, the event also forced scholars to question if religious tourism has its own special issues with regard to terrorism. For example, if religion inspires terrorism, then are those on pilgrimage more likely to suffer the consequences of an act of terrorism? On the opposite side of the coin, might religious tourists become so ideologically committed to a violent pro-religious ideology that they perform acts of terrorism against other tourists? These and many more questions remain unanswered when discussing religion and terrorism. And as I have always said, even in the previous lessons, terrorism is a very wide topic, and especially now when we start to talk about religion and terrorism, you understand the complexities of religion, both in the Christian world and both in the Islamic world and even other religions. You understand how complex this matter is. Issues related to religion are really difficult to define. They are really difficult to understand. There are so many questions that remain unanswered even to date. Even in the Bible itself, there are so many questions that remain unanswered. Even in the Quran itself, there are so many questions that remain unanswered. So I'll try my level best to explain to the best of my knowledge what I understand regarding religion and terrorism. Most researchers tend to believe that an objective and internationally accepted definition of terrorism can never be agreed upon. Remember, we discussed this also, that there are over 200 definitions of terrorism. And we even saw in our previous lessons that scholars and experts who uh, concentrate or who study the field of terrorism, 209 of them during a research, 200 of them during research, they were unable to clearly define terrorism. Even 9 scholars among the experts, or 9 scholars among the those who had been tasked to define terrorism, failed themselves to reach a conclusion within themselves that this is the definition. However, most scholars and researchers tend to believe that an objective and internationally accepted definition of terrorism can never be agreed upon. After all, they say one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. We also saw this, that one man's terrorist is also another man's freedom fighter. The question of who is a terrorist, according to this school of thought, depends entirely on the subjective outlook of the definer. Subjective outlook of the definer. This is to say that depending on which side of the spectrum you are, then you are likely to define terrorism completely different from another person. Also, what is the role of religion and ideology in acts of terrorism? This is one of the questions that we have to ask ourselves. What is the role of religion and ideology in acts of terrorism? Again, is terrorism a result of religious ideology? Is religion the statistical independent variable that results in the dependent variables of acts of terror? What is religion? And are there certain religions that have a higher tendency to influence acts of violence against those who do not accept its doctrines? When we talk about the Islamic religion, we can say yes, there are religions that have a tendency to influence acts of violence against those who do not accept its doctrines. It's like some religions all over the world, they want to force their ideologies on other people. They want to force it onto you. And if you do not agree with their ideologies, then you become an enemy who deserves to perish, who deserves to die. And when I mention that, you know what I am talking about. Also, we have to ask ourselves, what is religion? So what is religion? Religion is usually defined as a social, cultural system of designated behaviors and practices, morals, beliefs, worldviews, texts, sanctified places, prophecies, ethics, or organizations that generally relates to humanity, to supernatural, transcendental, and spiritual elements. I would also like you to try. We always say we are religious. I am a member of this church. I'm a religious person. But on your own, also during your own free time, try to define religion in the most basic language that you understand. Because you are a religious person, I know. I know you go to church. I know your family goes to church. I know that most of you, not all of you, some of you are not religious per se, but you try to define a religion in the most basic terms that you can. Although there is no scholarly consensus over what precisely consists a religion, you see again, just like terrorism, there is no scholarly consensus. Different religions may or may not contain various elements, ranging from the divine, sacredness, faith, and a supernatural being or beings. Religion, however, has also caused great acts to occur, and it has acted as a social control mechanism for millions of people. Religion has acted as a social control mechanism for millions of people. There is an old rabbinic tale that teaches us that God gave us the Ten Commandments, not for some great religious or philosophical reason, but merely for one reason and one reason alone. We needed them. That is very interesting. That God did not give us the Ten Commandments for great religious or philosophical reason, but simply because we needed the Ten Commandments, that we needed to be guided, that we needed to be controlled, that we needed a social control. Human beings needed a social roadmap if societies were to exist. You can imagine if there is no religion, it's just like a criminal justice system. If there is no criminal justice system, then I think things will get out of hand very quickly. Religion tries to put in place structures and to control people on their behavior and on what they do. Those people who are deeply religious, whenever they want to break, let's say, one of the 10 commandments, when they remember that these are 10 commandments are very important to me as a religious person, then they shy away from engaging in that activity. Also, criminals, when they want to engage in criminal activity, and then they remember there is a criminal justice system, beginning with the arrest by the police and then prosecution in court of law, and then you end up in the prisons, so that you learn a lesson that you will never forget, and the lesson will be a lesson also to others who have similar behaviors. Then you tend to shy away from committing that criminal activity. In saying that, in fact, we can argue that much of Hebrew scripture, along with other religious or socially inspired texts, is exactly that, a social roadmap that permitted the structuring of society. So religion permitted the structuring of society, that when people remember what is mentioned in the Ten Commandments, then they keep away from committing these criminal acts or engaging in unethical behavior. On the other hand, as Marx emphasized, religion has not always had a positive social effect. Human history has known countless wars based on religious creeds or fought against other religious beliefs. Religion then has been a motivating factor for both good and evil. Religion has been a motivating factor for both good and evil. For example, in speaking about the role of religion in European wars of conquest, George Friedman noted that Portuguese exploration was a vast national enterprise. A great deal of money was stacked on unknown price. The Portuguese were motivated by internal politics, inspired by rivalry, religion, ideology, and the sheer glory of their own interest or their own needs. Also, there are more questions that we may need to ask ourselves when we discuss the role of religion in terrorism. There are still some more questions. Some more scholars have long sought to answer if these religious battles are truly theological in nature, or does religion act as the cover for political, economic, or other factors? Does religion act as a root cause independent variable, or is it nothing more than a pretext to motivate the masses to fight? Does religion act as a mere cover hiding a conflict's real root cause? Is religion an inspiration that creates an ideological underpinning for the warring parties, or a way to hide real issues? Is there a relationship between economic issues and religion? Is terrorism related to religious ideologies? What are other factors play a part in aspiring acts of terrorism? These are some of the questions that are still undergoing immense research by scholars, by experts who study the subject of terrorism and the subject of religion. Is terrorism related to religious ideologies? Some people all over the world, they say maybe terrorism is caused by uh, a lack of employment, lack of resources, or terrorism is caused by people feeling that injustices have been committed against them. So they react, and the only way they want to express their dissatisfaction is through acts of terror. However, is terrorism related to religious ideologies? So these and many others are questions that remain unanswered. And as we continue with our topic to try and understand this phenomenon, then we also have to separately ask ourselves these questions and come to conclusions. Is terrorism related to religious ideologies? In his book on athletics and security, somebody called Tarlow has noted that terrorism, like any social disease, is not monolithic but has multiple mutations. These strains of terrorism will have commonalities and also demonstrate differences. We're still talking about the nature that terrorism is very diverse, that terrorism has got multiple mutations, that sometimes the terrorist acts emerge from religion, sometimes they emerge from injustices committed against the people, sometimes they emerge from mainly what I'm talking about is social injustices and even lack and even poverty and whatever. Thus, we cannot answer the above questions until we consider both the religious and non-religious reasons that motivate people to sacrifice their lives and the lives of the innocent in acts of terrorism. Why do people sacrifice their lives? And they take lives of others who are innocent in acts of terrorism. Non-religious facts. Now, take note of this, that many function as root cause for terrorism. Non-religious facts that may function as root causes for terrorism. There is wide scholarly disagreement regarding religion as a root cause of terrorism. You see, there is wide scholarly disagreement. Scholars themselves, they cannot agree that actually religion is a cause of terrorism. In fact, both politicians and members of the chartering classes, such as political pundits, economists, and academics, either have or tend to blame other phenomena as root cause of terrorism. I've spoken about social injustice, I've spoken about poverty, I've spoken about lack of employment, I've spoken about feeling that the government or other entities have committed injustices against you, and so you engage in a violent way to have your way, or to try to force your ideology, or to try to force your need. For example, in an article published in the Huffington Post, a left of center publication, Steve Mariotti writes, "We blame religion and ignore the economic underpinnings of terrorism at our peril. We cannot fight back with entrepreneurship, education. We can fight back with entrepreneurship, education, and initiatives that will encourage a worldwide entrepreneurial ecosystem to take root instead of poisonous ideologies." So we blame religions and ignore the economic underpinning of terrorism. You'll find that most people, when we talk about terrorism, their mind goes to a particular religion, forgetting that there are other factors that could be playing role in the emergence of terrorism. For example, when we have the attack at D2 recently, there are reports that some Kenyans, young men from living at Mushada, I know that the Shia side, most of you know this area, that they were involved in these terrorist acts, and they were actually Kenyans, and these people are not Muslims. So we can then, based on that, conclude that maybe their involvement in this act was not based on religion, but it was based on other factors that need to be understood. We say that Ahmed Sheikh Mohammed, writing in the Kenyan publication, the Sahan Journal, notes that terrorism root causes are multiple, not only religion. He states that, in short, a mix of ignorance, poverty, oppression, repression, exclusion. Exclusion is when people feel that they have been excluded from the system. Marginalization and occupation explain the phenomenon of terrorism. From his perspective, and he is principally addressing Islamic terrorism, there is no one factor but a combination of factors that lead to frustrations that manifest themselves in acts of terrorism. So we cannot actually base only a religion we cannot base only our thinking that it is only religion that leads to terrorism, and specifically the Islamic religion. No, there are other factors: ignorance, poverty, oppression, repression, exclusion, these kind of things. They, one way or the other, lead to terrorism. There were acts, there are other militia groups in Kenya that have existed in the past that were specializing in hacking people using machetes. That is actually terrorism because they are using, that's what we call domestic terrorism. They are actually using terror and fear to force their ideologies on the people. You remember this group that was called Mungiki? There was another also group, I don't know, called Jeshi la Mzee, I don't know, something like that. You can also check on those domestic groups that have existed in Kenya that have engaged in acts which are related to terrorism. Many scholars and political analysts take the position that terrorism is a result of lack of economic opportunity. You see, many scholars take the position that terrorism is a result of lack of economic opportunity. Other writers have provided a point of reasons for terrorism. For example, Dr. Ami Zalman sees terrorism first and foremost as a political issue. He writes, all terrorist acts are motivated by two things. One, social and political injustice. People choose terrorism when they are trying to right what they perceive to be a social, political, or historical wrong. When they have been stripped of their land or rights or denied these things. Social and political injustice. Social and political injustice. Two, they believe that violence or its threat will be effective and usher in change. Another way of saying this is they believe that violent means justify the ends. Many terrorists in history said sincerely that they chose violence after long deliberation because they felt they had no choice. So another way of saying is that violent means justifies the end. When there is no other choice, then people are likely to engage in acts of terrorism. Terrorism as a form of war. Remember, we are still talking about religion and terrorism. So we are moving from one stage to the other as we develop our theory until we reach the conclusion we see whether religion plays a part in terrorism. Terrorism is a form of war, and as such, it has both a secular and religious component. Both are secular. Secular means earthly, non-spiritual. So terrorism has both a non-spiritual and religious component. If we understand religion as nothing more than ideology, then next world ideologies, be they deity-oriented or secular-oriented, tend to show high levels of intolerance that may lead to violence. The actions of left-wing students refusing to allow freedom of speech on university campuses around the world, or speech control in the form of political correctness, are no different than the religious wars of both Christianity and Islam. Secular, as I have said, means earthly or non-spiritual. The religious sources of Islamic terrorism. Now, let's talk about Islamic terrorism specifically, because even me and you, we have conclusions that terrorism is actually based on the Islamic religion. While terrorism, even in the form of suicide attacks, is not an Islamic phenomenon by definition, it cannot be ignored that the lion's share of terrorist acts and the most devastating of them in recent years have been perpetrated in the name of Islam. That is true. Talk of 9/11, talk of Nairobi, Tanzania simultaneous bombings, talk of Westgate attacks, talk of what is happening in Afghanistan, what is happening in Syria. You see that the lion's share of terrorist acts lies in the Islamic religion. This fact has sparked fundamental debate both in the West and within the Muslim world regarding the link between the acts and the teachings of Islam. They have sparked debate all over the world that the teachings of of Islamic religion actually generates or tends to lead to acts of terror. You know what happens in the, how do they call them? This is school where children, it is just escaping my mind. But there are ritual schools in Kenya, especially where the Muslim religion is very strong, like Lamu and Mombasa. Madras, where students go and they are taught that there has been injustices committed against their forefathers, against their current fathers, against them, and in the future they need to take action to revenge against these attacks because these injustices have been committed against them for so many years. So children are taught, and their mind is programmed to have hatred within them, and they are told that the only way to achieve or to change their ideologies is to use threats and violence in the form of terrorism. Most Western analysts are hesitant to identify such acts with the bona fide teachings of one of the world's great religions, and they prefer to view them as perversion of a religion that is essentially peace-loving and tolerant. The non-Islamic etiologies of this phenomenon include political causes. Those who those who say that Islamic religion does not contribute to terrorism, tend to divert the causes of terrorism to political causes. The the Israeli-Arab conflict for many years, cultural causes, rebellion against Western cultural colonialism, and social causes, alienation and poverty. So those who believe that terrorism doesn't actually originate from the Islamic religion, they have their own other explanations. That is why we say terrorism has both secular and religion aspects into these acts. And then we say that while no public figure in the West will deny the imperative of fighting the war against terrorism, it is equally politically correct to add that the codicil that for the war to be won, these justified grievances pertaining to the root causes of terrorism should be addressed. Therefore, to treat Islamic terrorism as the consequences of political and socio-economic factors alone will not do justice to the significance of the religious culture in which this phenomenon is rooted and nurtured. In order to comprehend the motivation for these acts and to draw up an effective strategy for a war against terrorism, it is necessary to understand the religious ideological factors which are deeply embedded in terrorism. As we move along, we shall also look at the religious ideological factors which directly contribute to terrorism, and they are embedded in Islam. Conclusion: the issue then is not one of religion, but of the misuse of ideologies and the refusal to permit alternative thought processes. Violence and terrorism have many causes, and surely one of them is the certainty that one side or ideology has monopoly on truth. Does religion then lead to acts of terrorism? The answer is both a yes and a no. So what we are trying to say is that we cannot say with certainty that religion leads to terrorism. The answer is both a yes and no. When you look at whatever has been happening all over the world, acts of terrorism that have been carried out of the world, all over the world, and the lion's share we have seen lies in the Islamic religion, then we can clearly conclude that terrorism is actually linked to the Islamic religion, that the ideologies that emanate from the Islamic religion lead to terrorism. On the other hand, we can say that there are other factors. We have seen socio-economic factors, we have seen social injustice, we have seen poverty. These are also causes of terrorism. So we can say religion, in one way or the other, leads to terrorism. And religion, on the other way, on the other hand, does not lead to terrorism. So it is a subject that is still under research. There is no clear conclusion whether terrorism is linked to religion. But from your own perspective and from my perspective, we can say the lion's share, as we have seen in the presentation, lies on the side of the Islamic religious ideologies that generate terrorism. So With those few remarks, I want to say that this is a very complex topic that we are discussing, religion and terrorism, and I will try my best and come up with another way to explain it again as we go along during the course. But for now, just understand that the answer is both a yes and a no, that religion plays a role in terrorism. Thank you very much. With those few remarks, we are going to stop here and we shall move to lesson 4. Please, you have my email address. I think it's time for you to start submitting your assignment. I'm not going to give you another assignment now until we reach lesson 6. However, the initial assignments, 2 of them, please can you complete them and can you send to me the feedback? I hope you remember what we talked about and what I really wanted from you in terms of the assignments. Thank you very much, and we are going to move to lesson 4. Bye bye. See you.